Gero Nurses, Tales from the Front, is made possible thanks to support from the Center for Education and Research on Aging at the University of the Fraser Valley and the Gerontological Nurses Association of British Columbia.
Welcome to our first real episode of Gero Nurses, Tales from the Front, where our guest is Ian Lee. So here they are, everybody's favorite doctor nurses, Lillian Hung and Shelley Canning.
Hi, Ian. We are very super excited to have you to our very first podcast and to learn a little bit about your story. We want to know, first of all, we want to know what brings you to nursing. And can you just tell us a little bit of your background and let us know, what brings you, you come to nursing? Yeah.
So my story is a little bit, I guess it's a little bit interesting. So I grew up having an uncle as a nurse. He worked as a nurse here and as well as in Hong Kong as well. And I think growing up, he was a very reliable resource to the family.
Right.
And so this was something that, that was important to me when I was thinking about, what I should do, when I graduate from high school or growing up, people always ask, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I knew that I wanted to work in a profession where the skills I learned would be useful on and off work. So that was important to me. And growing up with this uncle, he lived a very fun lifestyle, he was, he often treated my brother to nice things to eat out and stuff like that. And I thought to myself, knowing that he was a nurse, I wanted to be like that one day. So I think that's what got me thinking about, maybe becoming a nurse, knowing that how he was respected in the family as a reliable resource, as well as being able to, support his own lifestyle, support his family and whatnot was something that was attractive to me. And so when the opportunity did come for me to, enroll into nursing school, I jumped on it.
So your first kind of motivators, you were thinking about it in terms of, you weren't so much envisioning yourself in that caregiving role, but kind of the bigger possibilities of some benefits of nursing?
Yeah, for sure. I don't think at that time I did much research into what being a nurse entailed, what the day-to-day life of being a nurse was like. In retrospect, I don't think any of us who became nurses, would have ever imagined what being a nurse was like, before school and stuff like that. But definitely it was the idea that this was something that would be that would really benefit my family, and that this would provide some stability for myself was both reassuring for myself and for my parents as well. So
and what were your first goals? So when you finished nursing school, you would have had some ideas about all the different areas that nurses work in, and where were you first attracted to work as a new nurse?
I think when I first graduated, I think, of course, that like many new grads, we wanted to work in an area that gave us the most skills. And so that often meant working in surgical or medicine. And at that time, we know that in healthcare, hiring cycles fluctuate, the need for nurses fluctuate. And unfortunately, I was at the time where, it was difficult for me to find work at the time, right? But, my uncle, again, he worked in long-term care here, it suggests that, long-term care was something that you should consider and stuff like that. And so, I looked up, some of the long-term care facilities, and then, and I got a job there, and I never looked back since.
Okay, so it's interesting that we hear that a lot, that nurses are more interested in medical surgical nursing, and that was your first choice, and then you end up working in long-term care. So what was that like? Your experience was like in working in long-term care?
It was actually a lot better than I thought. It was actually a lot better. Like, of course, like I really enjoyed like the independence and the freedom that you get working as a long-term care nurse. And I think even in acute care, right, you always hear talk about, oh, like they like people like working at the smaller hospitals,
Right.
They always like, oh, I like to work at the small community hospitals than like the big, the big city hospitals and stuff like that. Obviously, there are people who love working at big city hospitals with good learning opportunities. But, in terms of work environment and like your colleagues and stuff like that, people always talk about, oh, I like to work at the small community hospital. And then working in long-term care, because of the way how, our continuing care services are set up, you're often, you work in a very small organization in comparison. Mm-hmm. I think that when you work in a small organization like this, you get there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of support for you to test ideas if you have any, about how you would like to do things, how you like to provide care and stuff like that. And I think I really enjoyed that. And I, from speaking to my friends who work in the large health authorities and stuff like that, they didn't, if they ever wanted to try something or change something, there's a lot more steps and a lot more, red tape or bureaucracy to get through in order to even try an idea. So I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy working in long-term care. And I enjoy, those are some of the things that I think kept me in the industry. Yeah.
What was your initial role like? If you remember, like, what kind of nursing were you doing in long-term care? Were you?
I was a frontline nurse. So I was a frontline nurse. And so I had my resident load. Being a registered nurse, you're pretty always trained to at least be prepared to take on the charge nurse role as well. Mm-hmm. So those were some of the things that I did. I remember, 2 shifts in, I was offered the role as a charge nurse. So that was a bit of a surprise. It doesn't happen in acute care for sure. But I think those were the type of things that I think, encouraged me to want to take more responsibility and take more ownership of being a nurse and caring for my residents, as well as providing leadership for my staff. I think that when you're thrown into, a position where you're looked up to and you have all these responsibilities, it was a nice feeling to know that, I'm being valued and I'm growing very quickly.
Were there any early care experiences that you had that really stand out, like direct care experiences with a resident that you felt kind of really helped you to see your role there?
With a resident, I do. I remember one of the first residents that I've had. Working in, I first started working in long-term care, and then of course, the vast majority of our residents had dementia, mm-hmm. right? And so even now, there's a very low expectation that your resident will remember you, at least for me. At that time, I was both new, I was casual, so I was floating everywhere within the facility, right? So I didn't expect anyone to remember my name. But there was this one resident, and I worked a lot of nights back then.
Right.
I worked a lot of night shifts. And there was this one resident, who was up at night often, but she remembered my name, and I would stay up with her to kind of chat throughout the night and stuff like that. And so that was one of my experiences that I kind of remembered. And she was I think she was also the first resident that I watched pass away as well. And so that was, I think she had an impression on my care as a nurse as well, just knowing that how important it is to have these kind of social interactions with residents that mean so much for them, and to also not make assumptions that, you know, just because they might exhibit some mild cognitive deficits or something like that does not mean they don't have the capacity to remember your name or who you are.
That's a pretty powerful relationship that you were able to form there.
Yeah, and I think often, as caregivers, I think, like, you know, we always talk about how we need to, like, you know, kind of remember not to become too task focused at this time when we are caring and stuff. Like, it's often so difficult because, you know, your responsibilities and the resident complexity has been increasing over the year after year and stuff like that. But we often forget to remember that, you know, to take those moments out of these times to talk to residents means the world to them, because at the end of the day, like, you know, you're their family, right? So, like, I think it's, yeah. So those are some of the things that I think as caregivers we need to always remember, that, you know, they don't have anyone, well, often they don't have much, like, you know, much social support, and that you're part of their social circle, and, you know, it's important for us to at least spend some time to get to know them, you know, to help them support their social needs.
Wow. That really touched my heart.
I know.
The things that you said about relationship, and then you are the families of those residents when you're there.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit about, like, okay, so we are in pandemic, and so you mentioned about, you know, leadership and, like, being in a long-term care facility, a smaller organization that you're able to, like, when you have ideas, you're able to test the ideas that you want to, you know, to see that would benefit your residents or not. And can you say a little bit more about that? Like, what kind of ideas that did you test, and what might be some of the projects or things that you have done during the pandemic to help the residents?
Well, I'll talk about an idea that, since pandemic, I'll talk about an idea that didn't really come from me, but, like, you know, one of the things that, you know, I think all facilities have been struggling with, especially with residents who have some form of dementia, is, like, you know, when they're on isolation, how do we make sure that they stay in their room? And oftentimes that becomes a very big challenge, right? And so, like, the idea was, like, you know, how do we, like, there were people who would always go into the dining room to watch TV as part of their routine kind of thing, right? And so, like, one of the first things that, you know, that we didn't know what to do, and then, like, you know, one of our, you know, other managers, you know, quickly suggested that, you know what, why don't we try using these, like, we had these, like, tablet mounts that were donated to us. And so, like, she suggested, you know what, like, this person wanted to watch TV, you know, in the TV, why don't we just bring the tablet, you know, mount the entertainment on this tablet and have it in her room. So this was something that we implemented right away. You know, of course, like, you know, I think in a more complicated setting, we'd think about, okay, like, what would be the proper procedure of cleaning this? You know, we'd look up all the guidelines, you know, is there a manufacturer approved product for cleaning this stand and stuff like that? And of course, like, you need to do some of these things as well, right? But at the same time, it was like there was agency, and there was the speed of implementing this quickly, at least to test it out. It didn't work as well as we thought it would, you know, because at the same time, you know, like, people like watching entertainment on a much bigger screen than on this tiny tablet, right? But at the same time, but you see that, you know, when there's an idea coming from different sources, not just from care. From care staff or care professionals, that it can be taken very readily and can be implemented very quickly.
That is a great example. Yeah.
and something kind of just so logical. So if the reason folks are going into the dining room is to be entertained, well, let's bring the entertainment to them. Let's bring the TV there.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah, I know. And it's like often, like, you know, we go after kind of like we spend so much time thinking about the 1% or like the 0.1% chance that something could go wrong. We forget about, you know, what about the 90% chance that it might work, or what would be the risk of, it's not working kind of thing, right? And I think that often, some of like healthcare providers, we have a lens of, we've seen the worst that could happen. So I think that affects our judgment. So to hear that, provided have this input come from someone else, then it allows you to kind of remember that, okay, you know what, like some of these things maybe could work kind of thing, right? So
that is so true. Like in working in healthcare, we are so risk averse. Like we are just so worried about the risk, right? And Ian, you have a master degree, and I recall that it was in the news that when you were in your master program that you developed an app to help senior to do grocery shopping. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this came out of like, so like I did a master's in seniors care at UBC. And so one of the topics that we were talking about was, what are some of the things that you can do to help seniors age in place? Okay. And so, so one of our classmates was like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if like seniors could just like order Starbucks, and, there was an app that's just going to order Starbucks and get Starbucks delivered to them. And of course, now we have all these like, Uber Eats and Food Dash, DoorDash and stuff like that. But like back then there wasn't the stuff as readily yet. And so I thought, like, you know what? Well, why stop at Starbucks, right? I mean, like the thing that, why not do groceries and stuff like that? So the master's program that I was a part of is the Masters of Health Leadership and Policy at UBC. And so like this program is organized in a way where like, you spent 40% of your coursework actually with engineering professionals, software engineers, mechanical engineers and stuff like that. So this gave me the opportunity to talk to people who are able to develop software, to talk to, computer programmers about, what is this something that we might be able to do and test these ideas and stuff like that. And so out of that, we laid the groundwork for developing a prototype, and I spent some more time after graduation, and we were able to test the idea of making a web application that helped organizations facilitate grocery shopping by their volunteers to seniors. Well, I'm sorry to say that, but because of the pandemic, we've had to put this on hold, for a number of reasons. But this was something that I think I enjoyed being as a nurse as well, is that you also get the opportunity to work with different people to solve different problems as well. So
it's a very cool app, and we're seeing the importance of people being able to order from home, right? Mm-hmm. has just been heightened by the pandemic. Mm-hmm, so definitely. Yeah, it's totally timely. Absolutely. I can see the benefits. Yeah. One of the things we know is that isolation. So being able to order from home is a way to deal with the isolation, but we see, the isolation is an issue for our community living folks and folks living in nursing homes. And you must be seeing a fair amount of that isolation. I know you talked about the nurse's role and how we really do become part of family, but that must be even heightened now.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know much about because I had to place the service on hold, so I didn't get the opportunity to talk about. But I do remember when the service was running that there were a lot. I was surprised about how many seniors were living alone. Even before the pandemic, right? There were a lot of seniors who were living at home and with kids that are not in Vancouver or in the Lower Mainland. So we get calls from those kids asking about whether or not the service could be available for their parent or whatnot in Vancouver. So I was surprised about how many seniors are actually living alone in Vancouver. That needed a service like this. Yeah.
So when it comes to developing solutions for things like addressing social isolations, so you mentioned about your example that working with engineers, but what do you see about the role of a nurse to, to work with people in other disciplines to do to create these kind of solutions for social impact? Like why people should come to involve a nurse to have them in the team?
Well, definitely because well, I can tell you that I think that even though I wish that we would be more involved in in a lot of these development of products and software, because a lot of times we're the ones who either tell people how to use it or we use it ourselves and stuff like that, right? So I think that when you talk to these engineers and you talk to these these business professionals and stuff like that, there's a feel that that our industry is growing and that there's a lot of opportunity, even not among healthcare circles, right? So they are looking for opportunities to get into this world, right? Okay, and so they would develop stuff often with very little input from people who are actually using it. And then as nurses, we look at these products and we're like, well, did you know we had this already? Or you know that this is what we do and stuff like that. So they're very interested in learning about the needs of our industry, and they would, especially those who want to break into our industry with a particular product or software and stuff like that. I get you get the feeling that they want your input, but often I think there's more and more companies are starting to have clinical consultants where they require healthcare providers just to comment about their product and stuff like that and help them with product development. And I think it's when that happens that these companies develop pretty useful, pretty good products, right? So I think that my experience working with in the MHLP program was that you get the opportunity to know kind of their challenges as well, and it also gives you an opportunity. That they would want it gives them the opportunity to network with you to learn about what your needs are, but it also gives you practice and an opportunity to learn about, well, why my goals doesn't work for these stakeholders, and it also gives you practice about how do you speak in ways that make your goals understood to these other stakeholders as well. Because I think oftentimes we want to reach the same idea, but we need to know there are keywords that I think that you often need to know that often have a large impact depending on who you're talking to, depending on the group of people you're talking to. Engineers, they like to hear the words, how do you reduce lead times? How do you reduce lead times? How do you increase efficiency? How do you decrease waste and stuff like that? You're talking to a business person, they might be talking about, how do you make your ROI and stuff like that, right? So you get the opportunity to learn what are the impact words for these various group of peoples so that you can accurately communicate your care needs when you're talking for your population, for your seniors and for your residents when you're working with these people. So
I think that it's just fabulous. Yes. I got to make this comment. I mean, people often think, working in gerontology is, giving medications in long-term care, but there's so much more. It's so exciting to hear, all these possibilities and the work that you do. Over to you, Shelley.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is a role that clearly brand new nurse Ian didn't envision when your uncle suggested long-term care, right? This is out of the box a bit.
Yeah. And so I would say that's the thing that, when you're going into long-term care, you're going to seniors care, that as a nurse, you have more opportunities to branch out to these different types of roles, to these different types of jobs, just because of how the industry is set up. The private sector is very much involved in the delivery of our long-term care, both I'm not just talking about long-term care as in having a senior home, but often talking about, electronic health records, for instance, and different types of entertainment equipment, recreation equipment, and stuff like that. You have all these different companies that you'll get to know, and then there are all these different possibilities as a nurse when you're working in this industry.
And you're grounded in really understanding the needs that our seniors have. And you know, that's where the nurse really, it sounds like you bring that expertise to make sure that these ideas have meaning, that they have an application that is meaningful at the end, because it's got to trickle down to our older folks and make a difference there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And like, you know, and that feeling that like, you know, when you're giving someone that like staff ads that people actually use and that they need, I think it's like, you know, it's a very good, you feel that like you've done your job.
Awesome.
Wonderful. That's really wonderful. So is there anything else that you would like to tell us?
I think that like, you know, that I think looking back, you know, there's definitely a lot of opportunities in long-term care that people do not realize. There's a lot of need in long-term care that I think everybody realizes that they don't realize that, you know what, just there's a lot of need and opportunity. There's a lot of need in long-term care, and there's a lot of opportunity in long-term care that I think a lot of my colleagues, our colleagues, you know, do not quite realize that, you know what, if you go have it, you know, trying a career in seniors in long-term care can allow you to have an opportunity, to allow you the opportunity to do so many different things. That I think that, you know, at the end of the day, if anyone's on the fence of trying, I would definitely tell them that, you know what, you should give it a shot for sure. You know, you'll never know where you'll end up.
So as a gerontology nurse, you see a future for yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to be in this industry, you know, for the foreseeable future, for sure. Yeah, I enjoy working here and I enjoy the people I work with. And yeah, I can't see myself going back to, you know, can't see myself doing anything else at this point yet.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ian. And it's really inspirational. Yeah. So
yeah,
I appreciate it.
You really highlight a piece of nursing, you know, a role that we can be engaged in that we don't talk about or hear about very much. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you guys. And, you know, if you guys ever need anything, just like give me a shout.
Ah, awesome. We might.
Thanks.
And that's the show.